That's like
I can handle it.
that's like nap level.
So our topic is climate policy without the U.S. government. We don't know what position the Trump administration is going to take yet about staying in or leaving the Paris Agreement, but it is pretty clear from other actions that they've taken that climate policy funding is going to be drastically reduced and various programs eliminated. So the general question we want to talk about it, and our speaker will address, is sort of are there other ways that the United States can continue with climate policy. Our speaker is Professor John Byrne from the University of Delaware, where he is Distinguished Professor of Energy and Climate Policy and directs a Center for Energy and Environmental Policy. He has a very long resume. His program is one of the very early ones that were started on energy environment, and I think it has a couple of interesting aspects. One is that it combines the social science and engineering aspects, and the second is that his center can grant degrees specifically in energy and environmental policy for the students who've gone through there. Dr. Byrne has a lot of ties to South Korea, which are worth mentioning, I think. He's has taught at Seoul National Universities. He has a distinguished professor rank at another university, and he's directed or co-directed one or two institutes on sustainability in South Korea. He's chair of another Foundation for Renewable Energy and Environment, and a founding member of something called the International Solar Cities Initiative, which he may mention, I think, in his talk. He's advised a number of other bodies, including in China and India, on energy and environmental policy issues, and has been advisor to the U.S. National Council for Science and the Environment. He's written a number of books which have titles such as Green Energy Economies, Energy Environment, the Policy Challenge, Environmental Justice, and Transforming Power. I could go on, but I will stop there.
Please.
We welcome Professor Byrne.
Thank you very much. We're glad to be here. And do you want me, Miss?
You consider standing.
Yeah, it's your preference.
Okay, all right. So, well, I want to thank ERE and SICE and colleagues for the invite. And what I'd like to try and do today is sort of give you an overview of the climate change debate that's now going to go on again. This is not the first time we've gone down this road, but and I'm going to offer you sort of an argument that the likely role of the central government in the U.S. is not strong, but the absence of that central government function, the presence of dysfunction in the central government is not necessarily something that should make us all sort of throw up our hands. And the argument is basically that in the absence of a significant federal role in this issue for quite some time, our subnational entities, states and localities, have actually carved out quite innovative strategies and have found ways to get political support for those strategies. And if you look at what our colleagues in Europe have done, which have had more success in treating this as an issue that it appropriately needs, there's a lot of, and I'm going to also briefly note in Asia, there is a lot of interest in what the subnational units can do for a series of reasons having to do with often our central governments having difficulty in this area. This is an area where there's some fairly large players. The energy sector remains the most capitalized sector in a modern economy. So there's a lot of, if you will, money at stake in this matter. And it also is quite sophisticated on the technology side. So there's an awful lot of pressure that comes to bear in central governments on how to deal with these sorts of things. When these issues hit the subnational level, those sort of lobbying kinds of functions are less successful, and that's true both in Europe and in the US, and increasingly in Asia. So I'm going to try and persuade you that all is not lost, that we actually have opportunity. It will be international. It will be in some ways quite aggressive, in some ways it won't, but it will be in some ways aggressive, but it's unlikely to come from central government guidance, particularly obviously in the case of this issue of this country, at least for a period of time. So with that as a background, I'd like to get started, and I'm going to sort of start off with a science narrative and then with a social narrative. The science narrative, I think many of you know, but climate change is fundamentally a scientific problem. It was discovered by science. It was discovered by recent science. It was discovered by a science that could have spectroscopy skills that are beyond anything we could imagine. And if it hadn't have been for that discovery, whatever it is that we would call the problem of our relationship with the environment, human relationship with the environment, it wouldn't have been called climate change. But now we know climate change. However, that said, it is also very much a social problem. And so I'm going to start off by just characterizing it. So the first up, I have a couple of clips, and this is a clip prepared by NASA to visualize what is sort of the known universe of discourse on this, and it's going to show you 5-year anomalies. So these are 5-year periods of anomaly in temperature on the surface of the Earth. Different, you're going to see the entire, and these anomalies are going to obviously, you'll see, gather in a way that is what has the scientific community convinced that we have, through a change in chemistry, human beings have altered the pattern of climate, and this is what worries people. So I'm going to start with that. Just by the by, this database is one of the databases that are being discussed as something that the US wouldn't collect. Please be aware that if we don't collect it, someone else will. So that's not good for the world. It's not good for American science, but it is really, really unfortunate that something like this would not receive the investment of a society. In any case, here it goes. And my colleague Gil Teminio, who's with the center also and does a lot of this work. So you can see the yellow are anomalies that are increases in temperature in these regions, and we're rolling through every 5 years. Maybe we can just sort of slow down for a moment. This is, well, we're kind of almost at the very end now, but this pattern of increase in temperature that you're seeing here, while it accelerated from the end of the start of the Industrial Revolution, if you went back a little earlier, but if you look at the end of the 19th century, it started to accelerate, but actually the main acceleration has been in the last 20 to 30 years. And this is, now we can go to the, now you can see, okay? So it's that pattern. It is nonlinear. I don't know where my colleague is, they were just talking about nonlinear earlier, but this is nonlinear. And this is, from a science perspective, this grasps the problem that we face, that we have now built up into the atmosphere chemicals that are radiating back on the Earth at a rate that is nonlinear. It is no longer simply what we add to the atmosphere, but because those molecules stay in the atmosphere for 50 to 200 years, we're now in a problem that's going to take 50 to 200 years to resolve. Which brings us to the social side of all of this. Yeah, how do you get commitment to do something for that length of time? So let me do that. Now let me go to the social side of the story. During the same period that we started watching, this happened on the North American continent at an intersection in New York City called Times Square. So the upper left is what Times Square looked like at the beginning of the end of the 19th century, and the bottom left panel is what it looks like today. And whatever else you see there is an enormous energy density of daily life in that square, in this rotation progress. This became a model for development, for economic development that has taken root. It happened by previous thoughts about how economic growth takes place, this happened really fast. This was a very sudden and significant change in the world economy. But this is no longer the model. The model that's now being made for fast growth doesn't exist anymore in North America, or for that matter in Europe. It exists in Asia. So I'm going to take you to a second city now to illustrate that. And this is the city of Shenzhen. Shenzhen in 1980. Shenzhen at this time was a warehouse district, and did a little bit on the fishing industry. Now, I don't know if you know what is relevant. There are many things that Shenzhen has of high relevance to everyone in this room today, but do you know what is now in Shenzhen? So this is now, I'm going to show you in 40 years what has happened in Shenzhen. Shenzhen went from roughly 180,000 people to a little over, this is Shenzhen today, a little over 5 million people. It is where most iPhones are assembled. It is where the next generation of photovoltaic cells are being manufactured. It is where the high-tech economy is leading. So the reason for showing you these two is this model of development that we got into is a fast growth model. It goes much quicker, and now the same sort of density of development and energy use that was the case in New York City is now happening at half the time in Asia. And there's parts that are going to go faster than this, and some folks believe that Africa will become the next generation of this speed form of economic development. That coincides with this pattern. You may not have known it when you looked at your wallets in the last few days, but you happen to live you happen to be the wealthiest civilization ever on the planet. This is an economist, a British economist who worked on this matter, Angus Madison, of trying to figure out with all the right adjustments, what is the per capita income from roughly the 16th century to the present. And you can see the hockey stick that took place for this. This is extraordinary development, and you can see a lot of this is after 1950, 1960. The acceleration is even higher, and many believe that this will continue to accelerate because of what's happening in Asia and will soon be happening in Africa. What you probably know is that there is a matching curve for this, which is the carbon curve. So we are now part of a development model that needs a particular chemical in high concentrations in order to proceed. And this is the tie-up between the science, if you will, and the social perspectives. We now need that carbon, at least the way that we think that we're going to accelerate development and improve the conditions of daily life. This model, while it is overall is something quite breathtaking, and the amount of wealth that it's creating, the wealth that has been created is by no means evenly distributed. So if you look at on a per capita basis, what are the emissions for this high carbon development model? We are highly unequal in this approach. Europe and US have very high rates of carbon emissions per capita. If you had looked at this sort of graph maybe 7 or 8 years ago, China would have been just at the number. If you wanted to know what is the sustainable and equitable rate of emissions for human beings, it's 3.3 tons per person per year at populations of 1990. Okay, so if you increase population, the number goes down. Okay, anything above that gray bar is no longer sustainable, and it is part of the deepening inequality that we now face. So we have built a model that is fast growth. It depends upon carbon, and so far, it depends upon inequality. So there we are. That's what we have. That's how we live. I'm going to give you one last indication of what this means as part of this problem. We are taking risks climate risks that also have social faces to these climate risks that also express that inequality that we now have to deal with. So this is the aftermath of Katrina, and while no one can say that Katrina and Rita roared into New Orleans based upon molecules released in 1890 to 1940, specifically from, we don't have models that know that kind of thing. What we do know is that we're taking risks of high intensity storms because of the changed chemistry in the atmosphere. And who was most disadvantaged in a very wealthy society? The poorest of our communities were the ones that were put at greatest risk. The destruction of the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans is still, there are tens of thousands of families that still cannot return to where they lived. And so this is the kind, when I say, I'm not trying to be simply provocative or rhetorical or whatever. All I'm trying to say is we have now embedded in our interaction with the environment that the risks will be great, and the risks will disproportionately burden those who have both least responsibility, lowest emissions per capita, and least ability to deal with the problem. So that's enough of all of that. We have been trying to write a policy for this purpose at the international level called the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It has gone through 3 phases: a voluntary phase. There was a phase to set up an international agreement, and we would then adhere to it, and there would be mandates, and then there would also be enforcement. And then there is the post-Kyoto phase, which is that we're trying to figure out what to do next because the mandates didn't work, and we were not able to enforce them. What is the constant, though, in all 3 phases is that we have not found a way to bend the carbon curve in a consistent manner. There are 2 cases in here where we did bend it. Okay, so you can have the Soviet Union fall apart, you can have a regional economic depression, and you can have a global recession. Other than that, we don't know how to stop this rate of growth. At least if we know, we haven't implemented it in any consistent manner. So this is sort of the problem, if you will, that we face. There is discussion that we not worry about this problem in the U.S. and so there are some that are calling for canceling the Paris Agreement, rolling back the Clean Power Plan, and an old argument that's returning that somehow we need the economic growth first, so-called reverse Kuznets curve, that we need to grow first and then spend the money to clean up afterwards. And so I'd like to, before moving on from this point to, this is like sort of the grim part of the talk, so it's going to stop soon. Okay. I think it's important that you know, but anyway, it is grim. But I do want to mention that we have seen this cycle of policy retreat in the past, and I want to just encourage you to understand one of the implications when we retreat in policy, specifically the U.S. The U.S. withdrew from the Kyoto Protocol at the beginning of the new century. It was done on an argument similar to the argument that's being made today, which is that we should focus on economic growth and then solve environmental problems with the new wealth that we make. It was also argued then that it shouldn't be an international agreement and that we should let things fall wherever they do and just let that be that. Now, I'd like you to pay particular attention. You probably cannot see it right now, but at the very top of each bar is China. This is the share of total worldwide manufacturing of photovoltaic cells, okay, as of the time when the U.S. leaves the Kyoto Protocol. We left because we wanted to protect our economic development and we were going to protect our jobs. China now owns nearly 80% of the manufacturing of photovoltaic cells worldwide. And I just want to give you an anecdote of a discussion that I had with the head, the director of the Energy Research Institute in Beijing, which is the sort of the big institute that advises the government on policy in this matter. Okay? And it happened in 2002, and the director asked me, is it true that the U.S. is really going to withdraw from the Kyoto Protocol? And I said, yeah. And he said, no, what I mean is the U.S. really going to stay out of? And I thought this was it's in the newspapers. Yeah, I mean, I don't have any special pipeline into the President of the United States, but the President and his has said yes. And then he said, thank you. And I was stunned. I had no idea. Why are you thanking? I mean, it's in the newspapers. You could, what did this? So what he meant, and he was very explicit, if you stay out, we are going to compete for this green economy opportunity. We're going to compete, and if you stay out, our chances of winning increase. I personally think that the situation that we're being put in, again, in this round on the discussion that we now pull out of the Paris Accords, is that we are risking an additional, a repeat of this kind of approach where we don't compete for, that is the U.S. In the end, I don't care as much about the U.S. as I do about the planet, because this is very worrisome, but this is a problem with these kinds of approaches on policy. If you decide to stay out of it, if you decide to find a way to compete for jobs in some other sector, you're going to open the opportunity for others to compete. And there are a bunch of new approaches in the area that are low carbon that we'll have to see who wins, but that's where it goes. So this is sort of the grim part of the talk, and just reminding you that everything has consequences. And so what I'd now like to do is, I've got a couple of clips here. This is a clip from Vice that talks about an interesting phenomenon that's happening in Miami that, again, illustrates what the issues are and how our communities worldwide, but including even in the wealthy world, how communities are going to face significant risks because of what we're doing. So,
as you can see,
notice that it's sunny.
Water is coming over the seawall right next to it. We're actually building condos right against the seawalls that are already flooding. Because Miami is mostly limestone, it's port.
So you might wonder, isn't this a little bit of a puzzle? It's sunny, it's not raining, and the streets are flooded. What's the cause? So you heard about sea level rise. Now watch. This is what sea level rise is. This is the threat that we are facing. This is so-called sunny day flooding. Phenomenon.
So the water's just coming up from literally under the streets. And this is the problem that Miami faces. It's got some of the most at-risk real estate assets in the world. So we're going to see the cost of global warming and actually who's going to pay for it.
What this map shows you is if there's a 3-foot rise in sea level, the dark blue is going to be the area that's underwater. It's 145 billion. And 145 billion in property assets and 300,000 homes.
Wow. That's a voice from Swiss Re, which is a reinsurer. They buy insurance products on the secondary market, and they are now trying to understand what it will mean to absorb a risk like this of $145 billion of assets that are in danger. So what do you do about this? And especially, what do you do about it in the absence of a thoughtful policy? So I'm not trying to make fun of this next one, but we're kind of not thinking clearly. So
you don't think that the policy was designed to undermine the senator Florida's chances in the next presidential.
That's right,
election.
that must have been what the, so, the next clip is going to offer you what are an example of thinking that is receiving funding. But I think it also shows the problem. This is not likely to be the one that we are all going to choose, so. But Miami has limited options and has to face the problem. We don't have a clear central government commitment to do something, and we don't have a larger commitment internationally to do something, so what do you do? So, here goes. Oh, sorry. So this is an actual program, Flooding Solutions for Miami. This is a depiction of where the water goes when it rains and how the sewer system delivers that water, or the wastewater system delivers that water. As sea level rises, can I stop? No, you have to stop. So as sea level, can we go back just a tad? Yeah. Okay, yeah. So as we built a city, and that city was with sea levels at a certain height. This is the sea level rise they're talking about of about 3 feet, and you can see now the flooding, the so-called sunny day flooding that's taking place. So a project is now underway to try and prevent this flooding from occurring, and here is sort of 2 steps. One step is to put in these valves that then prevent water from returning. The second part of that is to then use pumps to pump the water out. And here comes an interesting part. Can we just, why don't we raise the heights of our roads? Now, you know, you have to think about that for a moment, that you're actually going to raise the heights of the roads in order to address a very large city's. And then the last problem that you have is that sea level rise increases, and so you have to build still higher barriers, still more money put into so-called disaster management. What is the cost of this particular round? This is this particular obligation they're trying at this time for
$400 million.
$400 million. So you think about what you could use $400 million for in Miami, and then so.
It's just lucky they don't have any other problems in the city.
Yeah, they don't have any other problems in the city. So that said, what does a climate response look like when the U.S. government is not playing? Against that depiction and the risks that our communities are being put in, there are some helpful lessons that have occurred over the last 15 years, and I'm going to try and briefly review those. First of all, this is not a problem of necessarily American policy views. The majorities remain high to do something about this problem. Depending on how you answer the question, the majority gets bigger or smaller. But it does appear that the American public is sufficiently convinced of the problem that action is needed. One of the ways in which action is expressed is through something in the U.S. called the Clean Power Plan. The Clean Power Plan put targets for each state to implement on trying to reduce carbon. This left it to the states and to their local communities to decide what to do about this. Actually, 31 states, it now looks like it's not going to be implemented, but 31 states were already halfway there in terms of finding a reasonable solution. And unless you think that a majority of the American population lost their minds, there does appear to be a strong interest in having tools to address this problem. 14 states, when the Clean Power Plan was submitted, 14 states had already met the goal. That's about 1/3 of the U.S. Population and over 36% of the economy. So, do we have tools? Yes. Where were they invented? Not in federal policy, but in state and local policy. Back in 2007, a team from our center looked at several of those tools. One includes a requirement that as a condition of sale of electricity into a jurisdiction, a certain percentage must come from renewable energy, and you go into a market for this purpose to buy compliance with that standard. We had 23 states that had those rules at that time. Energy Efficiency Resource Standard says the actual volume of of electricity sold must go down. We had eight states at the time that did that. And then we had 38 states that had what is called net metering, which is that if you self-generate and you send, for example, renewable energy-based electricity back into the grid, you must be paid the same price that you're charged to take from the grid. And that's actually very, very important because, well, as you'll see in a few minutes, it creates an opportunity for shift. Today, we have 37 states that have as a condition of sale a requirement that a certain percentage comes from renewable energy. I think it's whopping for folks to understand. I have to say, when I'm overseas, people think that because of the American government position, that folks are not ready to act here. A majority of the states have actually capped how much electricity can be generated in their jurisdictions. That's got to be voted from state and local sources. And we've got, 44 of our 50 states, and the District of Columbia also has that meeting. So anyway, we're in the midst of trying to update this particular study right now. We're going to try and have that ready in the next couple of months. But I wanted to bring this to your attention because these are the tools invented not by the federal government, but invented by our states. In addition, our cities participate in a whole variety of programs. This is C40, which is the 40 largest cities in the world, and these are the American cities that participate in C40. C40 sets a requirement that's equal to the Kyoto Protocol for compliance by the city. So these are cities that accepted that compliance requirement. These are additional city agreements with Carbon Disclosure Project, with ECLAE, which is actually an international body representing local environmental initiatives, and with our Conference of Mayors. Most of these dots are from the Conference of Mayors compliance.
What is the 2.9 M for CDP and ECLAE mean?
CDP is, I'm sorry, yeah. This is the amount of the American population that is under the CDP rule. The CDP rule is more aggressive than the C40 rule. The ECLAE and is a little bit more aggressive, and the Conference of Mayors is also more aggressive than Kyoto Protocol. So while we refused and withdrew from the Kyoto Protocol, a vast number of our cities sought to comply. In fact, over 1,000 cities, representing 1/3 of the population of the United States, are under agreements to comply with what were the standards of the Kyoto Protocol. So there is a disjuncture between what the central or federal government is saying and then what our states and localities are actually willing to do. I think this is important because this is also an indication of an ability to build a politics in favor of action. If we can't necessarily find a way to build those politics and have it happen at the central government level, we have been able to find ways to do it at the state level. So I think this is a hopefully encouraging sign for everyone, and even if the central government is not going to, we've got tools. But I'd like to now show you a next frame of this argument, which is that the innovation that is going on in the world is actually an innovation at the subnational level. The leadership in various efforts to solve this problem has been and continues to be currently at the subnational level. Now, the things I'm going to show you are not going to stop the problem today, but they are going to create the models for us to innovate and get ahead of this problem in the future. And the first one I'd like to show you, I hope this will work. We made a lot of effort on this one, Debbie, so I'm hoping. I don't know if you can see, before we do it, I don't know if you can see in the background the continents of the planet. Okay, so bus rapid transit is an idea created at the local level and watch innovation spread. That's the 1970s and 80s. Now you're getting the 1990s. And now you're getting...
JB, we love your graphics.
I think it's important to figure out, ways to deal with the private automobile, and I'm not, and some people sometimes, but I think that there's no way that we're going to solve this problem. This currently the second largest source of CO2 emissions in the world is the transportation sector, and it's likely to become the first in the next 10 to 20 years. Depends upon China and some others, but it's a big deal. Okay. And we may be able to fix our cars and have Uber services. I actually am a user of Uber. I'm not sure, but I think if we don't have a transit system, a backbone of this kind, then we're not gonna, and it's gonna likely have to be not simply subways, but things like buses. Who is the innovator for? What part of the world innovated this?
Asia.
This is a distinctly Latin innovation, right? I mean, this spread earliest and fastest in Latin America. It was brought about by communities that had far less wealth than the entities that put most of that carbon up in the atmosphere, but figured out ways that make it actually one of the also advantages of bus rapid transit is it increases mobility for not simply the middle class, but for those who are at the bottom of the pyramid. And so I think the opportunity to create differences, make those differences available to our communities, and then watch them proliferate. I think we are in an innovation diffusion process, and this is an example of one of those. How long it's going to take for us to make this work, and before that I don't know as much, but I want to give you a second one on the policy side. These are 6 cities we've been studying at our center. London, New York, Tokyo, and Seoul. Oh no, we didn't put, I'm sorry, we only put in the 4. We didn't put in the other 2, Amsterdam. And, yeah, okay. So this is London, New York, Tokyo, and Seoul. What you're going to see is in each column, you're going to see the current national plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And then you're going to see these large city plans, okay? And what you can see is in every case, national plans are exceeded by city plans. But it's only plans. It's only ambition, right? Now what you're going to see is the actual performance in real time between the national government and the city, okay? In every case, again, in actual performance. I think this will click. There it is. Cities are not only making the commitment to reduce, but they're actually achieving rates of reduction faster than national governments. Why? So now I'm making this case about there being a subnational opportunity. Why is it that cities are going faster? Come on, policy wonks. Why?
They're on the ground closer to the border, probably.
Okay. That's certainly one of the explanations that's often given.
You're not bogged down by bureaucracy.
Can you say again? I couldn't hear you.
You're not bogged down by bureaucracy.
There you go. Most of our national policies must fight it out in a fairly, in countries as diverse as this, must fight it out with fairly significant interests involved. And it's very difficult to get agreement. So if you look at the best national policy proposals in each of these countries, they are less than these city proposals. Partly because, as Will said, they're facing the problem more. If you're Miami, they're facing the problem more immediately, okay? But also, as Chandra said, they are not bogged down in that same politics. It's a different politics at the local level than it is at the national level. And one of the key politics that works at the local level is what happens when you decarbonize your local economy?
Quality of life improves.
Quality of life improves.
more efficient?
More efficient. Absolutely.
Better
Where's the money
economic.
go for the improvement? Who gets the jobs? Who does the decarbonization? Local economy and local politics go together in this particular case. Much of decarbonization efforts, if you're, for example, on efficiency, most of the high efficiency improvements that are going to be made are from local firms that are going to go out and upgrade our buildings and install solar technologies and so on. So there's a real economic opportunity that's local because of this, and the politics cut in favor of it. And you can see this time and again. You can go around, this kind of thing works. Here was a really, I think, really fascinating one on Europe. So this is the European cities through a thing called the Covenant of Mayors. How many cities in the Covenant?
In total, like thousands, but in this
Thousands,
one,
yes.
this study is 350.
So this is a study of 350 of several thousand cities in Europe, okay? The blue is their targeted reductions. The actual is their performance, okay, in this context. They're on track to meet a 30% reduction by 2020 instead of the 20% reduction that they had initially. And again, if you talk to the Covenant of Mayors, a driving force is this combination. Our quality of life is better. We have better control of our local economy. The politics work in favor because it's an ability for us to create. And efficiency is at the top of the charts for these kinds of initiatives. Okay, so that's what I would suggest to you is how these things are going to be made better and what it's going to take to make them better. I've got one last thing. These are small, at this stage, opportunities. These are things that are only being tried here and there. But we're going to need transformative institutions. The rate at which we're doing things now is not fast enough for us to really make the needed action to solve it. So these are the prices paid by the states on the horizontal bar that they pay to use electricity. The top of the bar is the residential, and the bottom of the bar is a commercial customer. This gray area, this is based upon, the U.S. Department of Energy requires the electric utility industry and the gas industry and others to report in on programs they have to save energy. These are the costs to save energy. Now, what I think is really, really important about this particular graph is the large white area between the gray and the orange. That difference between the gray and the orange is capital currently going to the wrong energy sector and needs to go to the right energy sector. If we can find a way to capture this, that now becomes the basis for us to capitalize a more energy efficient and a more renewable energy based future. That strategy is something that we created in the state of Delaware. We got an opportunity. Electricity prices went up when the caps came off on natural gas in the state of Delaware in 2007. It increased electric rates by 53%. So we got a chance. We wrote a bill to create something called the Sustainable Energy Utility, which is a non-profit corporation, actually exists, okay, in order to take that white area and invest it in buying more of the gray area. In other words, instead of sending all of that money, if you are in the state of Washington and you are a resident, you're paying this much for electricity that you are using. You would have to pay this much for the saving, and you now have this surplus that is able to be dedicated to more. And this happens every month. You pay the bill, this is what happens every month, okay? So you have a continuous source of capital that you can use. Little argument, I think if you want to really bend the carbon curve, you need to bend the capital curve. You need to send the capital to work in the new energy sector that you want, the sustainable energy sector rather than the old one. How do you do that? So we built a sustainable energy utility in Delaware, and we had our first effort to test this model, and it went like this. We put together a large number of government agencies' buildings and 2 universities into a pool in which we obtained from good engineering companies like Siemens and Johnson Controls and others a guarantee that they would provide savings at a rate that in money terms was greater than the capital cost to install and operate those systems. So government agencies, 2 universities, they now had a signed agreement in which the savings would be greater than what it would cost to invest. So we packaged up the bundle, we took it in for rating. The all-in cost, everything, was $72 million in capital, but then there's all the, then there was the debt. We went out to a 14.5-year payback, which you want to do. You want to go deep retrofit. So we went out to a 14.5-year payback. Total cost, everything, lawyers, everything, $110 million. We had $148 million in guarantees from companies. It's the first time I ever found myself in Moody's or Standard & Poor's discussing ratings. I mean, this was not my, it got AA plus rating. Do you know anything else that's rated AA plus? The US government is rated AA plus. Sustainable energy, organized the proper way. I mean, I'm stretching this. Any credit analyst would rip into me for what I'm about to say. But I just want to say, I mean, it's like you are comparing what is the credit worthiness of the US government and then what is the credit worthiness of sustainable energy. Now you have to do it right, but it worked. And because of this particular activity, we were able to save energy at rates that are much, much different and much faster than what is done in the marketplace now. This red curve is reporting utilities in the US. What is the savings as a percent of sales of these companies? So you're watching, it's clocking in at around 5%, okay, of savings. There are 2 other entities created like what we created as the Sustainable Energy Utility in Delaware, the Energy Trust of Oregon and Efficiency Vermont, but they were limited in the things that they could do. The Delaware's Sustainable Energy Utility has no limits as to fuel, no limits as to customer, and we built this system that is now saving, this is a guarantee against that 14.5 years, so we can stretch the performance of it out through some bonds that we sold were out to 20 years in length. This is now clocking in at savings of 25% as a percent of sales, compared to the industry saving at 5% in sales. So this is much, much faster. There is one while you are studying in or professing in District of Columbia, there is an SEU here. There's an SEU out in California, and we just wrapped up a sale in Pennsylvania. That's that last one there. The model has been, taken upside down and shaken and all the rest by the Asian Development Bank, which I think is very important because that's the fastest growing economic region in the world. We did get a shout out from the White House, and IEA found a way to. I think this is the kind, I'm not saying that this is the transformative industry, I'm just saying this is the kind where we are now using a capacity to take the capital we are already surrendering. You can pay it to your local Pepco company, or you can redirect at least a share of that payment toward the new energy economy you want to build. And that's what this model does. So I want to close with one last model for those who are interested in cities. So cities have a very important underutilized item of real estate. It is the rooftops of our large cities. I mean, when you start thinking about you're going to now bend the carbon curve and you got to bend the capital curve to bend the carbon curve, you have to really start thinking differently about cities and their assets. And so one effort that we have made is to think about this in the following way. We are now treating the rooftop real estate as an ability to bend the carbon curve by redirecting capital. So this is the average hourly consumption of the city of New York from midnight to midnight in May and in August. You want to always first go after the low-hanging fruit of energy efficiency. Most buildings have easily 20%, so we worked only on that 20% improvement in building energy efficiency in commercial buildings and residential buildings. After that, we then used what we estimated by fairly conservative methods, only 32% of the rooftop area available for hosting photovoltaic, new photovoltaic power plant. And we did this, at the existing rates of insulation in the city. This would be the result if you used this asset. You would have certain hours of the day, you would be almost at a point of serving the entire load of the city of electricity from a combination of energy efficiency and solar on rooftops. In August, where the peak is, you won't get quite so much, but just imagine that you would be cutting your peak roughly in half during this period of time. The most expensive electricity that is generated is peak electricity. So, last one. Oh, yeah, sorry. Our estimates are about 60% of daylight hour electricity could be provided by this method. You got to remember now, City of New York, and roughly 30% of all hours. Okay. We have a paper out. Be happy to share it with where we've now gone the next step and looked at how to finance this. We financed it the SEU way, so you stop paying for electricity coming from the grid, and you start instead using that money and pooling it in order to finance this kind of project. And so it looks like among the 6 cities that we studied, New York has the best chance, partly because it pays the highest electricity price, but it has the best chance of being able to finance something like this. The last one, because I think that the test bed eventually for all of this is going to be in Asia. We have to find a way to address the fastest growing economic region in the world and where most of our human community live. We have to figure out how to do this. So here is Seoul, same deal, okay? Same. This is the effect on the demand for electricity in Seoul after that 20% reduction. This is what happens if you use only public buildings. One of our arguments in the near term is, why don't we use public buildings as our pilots to test this proposition? Also, public buildings can take a longer rate of return. They can wait longer. If you now use all commercial plus public buildings, the city of Seoul, between the hours of 11 a.m. and 2 in the afternoon, would have electricity to sell in May. Not quite so good in August. This is using existing technology. Could we do more? Could we save more inside these buildings? There's a whole lot of things we could do. We could do a lot of that, okay? But this is what we think creates the opportunity for actually bending the carbon curve rather than slowing down the rate of its increase. Please,
So you're talking about 6 gigawatts of rooftop photovoltaics in Seoul, more or less,
That's right.
on those buildings. And did you have an estimate of what the cost of installation would be?
So the same paper that we did, now Seoul had, Korea controls its electricity price, and it has the lowest prices, okay, of the cities that we studied, okay? So it's going to take them longer than 16 years for payback, but there is an opportunity in this particular context that I just briefly mentioned. The mayor of Seoul has taken up this challenge. Took it up for the following reason. The Korean electricity sector gets about 35% of its electricity from nuclear power plants. And its large electricity company had to swap out some ubiquitous switches. There were tens of thousands of these switches. They didn't buy from a vendor that was authorized by IAEA. When the IAEA inspectors showed up, they found that they were required to remove them. The first summer when this removal took place, you had to take 35% of your electricity offline. Public buildings had a thermostat set at 88 degrees. So what we're sitting in now is it's ridiculously, but anyway, it was really something. And the mayor came up with this idea. The nuclear power plants are located at the southern part of the peninsula. The city's at the upper end of South Korea. Most of the electricity is traveling from those power plants in the southern part up. So he called for citizens and businesses of Seoul to undertake one less nuclear power plant. That was his goal. He announced it in 2013 that the citizens would try to offset. They can't literally close a plant, but they can reduce their demand at that kind of rate. Okay, and his rather aggressive planners set the goal at this for 2018. In 2016, one nuclear power plant's output equivalent was removed by these same kinds of actions in the city of Seoul. So now they are on their second nuclear power plant reduction. Again, the program is called One Less Nuclear Power Plant. He's just been elected as president of ICLEI. That's important because the model is now going to take a walk like the BRT model did and go visiting other neighborhoods because of that. And we are in active discussion about how to implement. They created their own utility called the Seoul Energy Corporation, and they are now going to try and build this sustainable energy strategy. So, my view, we have a really big and difficult problem. It would really be good if national governments could figure out how to cooperate and solve this problem, as Will asked me at one point earlier in the day, what about a carbon tax? All of this would be nice. You know why it's called COP22? Conference of Parties which meet on the treaty. Why it's called COP22? We've been negotiating for 22 years. This is probably not your best example of policy success. 22 years. I'm not sure we're ready for that approach. The U.S. government is clearly not willing in this round. I think it's putting the U.S. economy in jeopardy by doing what they're doing, but that's another matter. What I would say is that the engines of change are really going to be found at the subnational level, and the innovators, the ones who are going to take sort of transformative steps, I think, are also at the subnational level. That's my case. I'm sticking to it. That's it.
Thank you.
Floor is open.
I have a question, JB.
Sure.
So, as you know, I believe cities have potential, huge potential for leading the way. But the trick of cities is that they depend a lot on federal funding.
Yes.
So, for example, in transit, which I also agree with you, transit, we have, that's so overwhelmingly from the federal government.
Yeah.
How do cities continue to operate innovatively if their sources of funding are significant?
Yeah, I mean, it's a correct question, especially in some of our infrastructure areas. The central governments in these societies that were cited in this presentation, they depend upon central government support in order to take these actions in infrastructure. So I would offer two things. The building sector is not one of those. And the building sector currently is the largest source with power plants. Power plants are mainly supplying electricity to buildings. So it is, as an end-use sector, it's the largest source for CO2 emissions. And so I think we still have a shot, and cities have a great role around the world in how to address these sorts of problems. So on the transportation side, I think we're going to have difficulty without having central government participation. But what I would say is that if you talk to Swiss Re, if you remember the analyst that was looking at Miami, Swiss Re is looking for ways to invest in something that's going to reduce this kind of risk. And Swiss Re is an important player. They are not the same as a national government per se, but they are an important player. And if they start putting funds behind BRT in other parts of the world, or indicating to other entities in the world that if you participate, we will join you in a partnership, I think we have a real chance of even solving those kinds of infrastructure problems. Water is another one. A lot of times water, sometimes it's local, but sometimes it gets a lot of funding from the central government in these parts of in most parts of the world. That's another one that's going to be difficult, but again, if we can, we ought to look to those entities that have that chance. In the U.S., water is more decentralized, so we actually in the U.S. have an opportunity. Wastewater is an enormous, I think you kind of get, hopefully that cartoon gave you an example of what it means to move water in a city, okay? And talking seriously about raising the road heights, that's a lot. $400 million for one, that's a lot of, maybe we have a better idea. So, and I think that in the case of the U.S., at least that wastewater thing, it has a regional and local aspect to it, so we might be able to solve, still a lot to do. And I don't want to, but what I'm worried about is that we just do the automobiles told to go where they're supposed to go by the internet, and we call it a day. The amount of our land area that is dedicated to vehicles is, so we've got to find a better way to do this. We can't keep paving everything, so please.
I'm really intrigued by your idea of using the SEU to underwrite building deep energy retrofits in the MUSH sector.
Yes.
But as I thought about it in terms of other jurisdictions outside, I think the 33 municipalities and the two universities in the Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey area is terrific. There's an advantage in that environment of having a common legal framework that makes, for example, floating a bond or a standardized transaction not easy, but conceivable and credible. As you think about expanding this to other city environments, how important is the consideration of the differences in the legal and contractual environments that would allow you, for example, to obligate going forward to pay back a 14 or a 20-year loan,
That's right.
the savings on those buildings?
That's a really, really important question. So-called sovereign debt, if you're not been, sovereign debt means that you have the backing of the government in some fashion, and that if necessary taxes will be raised in order to pay off the debt. We'll find out on Friday if the U.S. is still observing this particular principle, but
Very old-fashioned.
anyway. So historically, sovereign debt gets the lowest cost applied to in terms of interest that has to be paid. So the reason that you want to go to the so-called WISHs, municipalities, universities, schools, and hospitals, but it really means the public sector and the non-profit private sector, okay? So you really want to go there because they get the lowest rates in the market, whether it's banks or bonds. So you're absolutely right, we need to go and do that. How do we do it with our own residences? So you probably have heard of one program that is adopted in the U.S. I think this is a very good program for the wealthy. What I'm about to say doesn't necessarily work if you're in other parts of the world. It's called PACE, Property Assessed Clean Energy, which means that you put a voluntary fee onto your property tax that is equal to what will be necessary to pay off the debt for the solar and energy efficiency that you put in. The banks initially argued against this, and some others, they didn't like this idea, because if you do that, and then you go bankrupt in your home, who pays off the debt? Who owns the home, and who pays off the debt? Well, the entity that gave you your mortgage thinks they own the home. The folks who put in your solar panels and your improved energy efficiency, energy using equipment, if they take what's called a senior lien, if they take if they're supposed to be paid off before, the banks don't like this, they went against it. There are ways to get around that, but I think the broader issue that you're raising, Irving, we have to find a way to do this that is not only for homeowners, because property assessed clean energy is only for homeowners. It leaves out great parts of our community to participate all in sustainable energy. Are we gonna make the same mistake on inequality in sustainable energy that we made in industrial energy? I hope not, okay? So how do we create this kind of alternative?
Can you write the contract with the ESCO who upgrades the mush building so that the ESCO is legally responsible to pay to deliver, either to deliver the savings or to pay the debt?
So they will deliver the savings. They won't pay the debt. Okay, that's the issue. But I just want to mention, again, this is a proposition that I think sometimes we can be so fancy that we forget. There is a big gap between what you pay for savings, and what you pay to use, okay? And those are funds that we are paying from all sectors of society. If we were to rewrite charters on, for example, municipalities, so that that difference could now be seen as a municipal or public fund.
Obligation.
And then I want to ask the colleagues you've been working with, if I have that public fund, okay, and this is what the mayor of the city of Seoul is doing, if I have that public fund prepared, will you match my fund? It's more likely that those entities will then come in because they now have what looks like a sovereign, right, fund in this sense, okay? And
But what they might say is, that's great while you're in office.
Yes.
When you run to be president of the country
yes,
or
yes,
head of
yes.
C40 instead
And
of...
the new mayor says out with that.
Says, I need the money myself.
So, even in the case of sovereign debt, you face this problem, right? In other words, a legislature can say, well,
That was a
we're not
bad
doing
deal.
that anymore.
Yeah.
And we're going to find out on Friday whether the Congress is saying, at least temporarily.
That was a bad deal.
Okay? So it is an important issue. It is not an easy one to solve, but I think there are new tools that are coming up for this purpose that are intended to try and create that comfort with the investment that is equivalent to sovereign investment. Okay? And it would then apply to other sectors, not only to the so-called mush. But I just want to say, too, while we figure out those, and you have some time, not much, but you got some time to figure that out. In the meantime, if you would do this in the mush sector, we would begin to bend the carbon curve. So we have an urgent need, and I think at this point, a really good strategy around the world is to focus on the mush and begin working our way down the chain to the next steps. And I'm sure we're going to figure out some ideas. This is where innovation should occur. And
John, can I ask you a question? In the work that you've done in the cities, are there particular policy approaches, packages of policies, or combinations of policies that work best to bend the curve quickly?
yeah,
Because when you put up the bus rapid transit, it's fascinating how that works, but it was over 30 or 40 years.
that's right. That's right. It has a
So
lot.
how do you get it accelerated? Have you seen a combination of policies at the municipal level, for example, that are really effective and really needed to push that curve, to bend the curve quicker?
So, in the study, we'll be happy to send you the paper so that you can look at it, okay? But we looked at what is making these projects pencil and make them pencil fast, okay? One obvious case is if you are in the neighborhood of expensive electricity, you're going to do better, okay, for that. So that's,
Okay.
what can cities do about that? For example, in the case of Seoul, they are now adopting, the government has abandoned the feed-in tariff, but the city of Seoul is adopting a feed-in tariff. I'm not here to advertise, I'm not, I think it's a good tool. And the reason why that works in the case of the city of Seoul is that the expense that it is now causing the city of Seoul to accommodate more power getting into the city, the distribution, the transmission that's required around the city is beginning to raise basic complaints among the population and finding a way out of that. So the feed-in tariff is seen as a way to take that an externality and in a certain sense expresses its value. Okay, so the second thing I would say is that the feed-in tariff is, or if you're asking in policy, something that makes the difference between the cost of sustainable energy and the cost of conventional energy closer, right? Probably the best policy to answer your question is to start with energy efficiency first, because there, the price of energy saving is lower than the price, okay? And giving, I guess the last thing, we have, in some cases in these 6 studies, we have municipalities that are constrained through rules as to what they can and can't commit financially on these kinds of things. You know, I think taking something that is as close to being a risk-free investment as, for example, streetlights, and replacing those. That's what we did in Pennsylvania. That's a roughly 70% reduction in the energy bill of the street lighting system. So we took 35 municipalities, put them together in a pool, and we're swapping out all of their lights and all of that. I think those are the things that, on the policy side, go after the energy efficiency first, so-called what California has as a loading order. The first load in the loading order is energy efficiency. I think that's probably. Do we have other ones that you would say, Joe?
Well, I mean, in general terms, you want to make sure that you provide certainty to the investor over a long period of time.
Yeah.
Fit is a very good one, and
Tariff certainly does, yeah.
yeah, and if you can address like the capital cost of the initial investments with, for instance, an investment tax credit, that takes a very big chunk out at the beginning of the debt service. So.
One quick thing to say about the BRT is that there was a huge gap between the first early adopter and then the second ones coming in. And a large factor in that was because most of the major institutions belittled the approach and didn't embrace it. So one of the challenges is how do we get the second go-round and the third go-round trying the approach faster rather than spending so much time belittling the uniqueness of the one city that's trying it.
I agree. Berkeley put up the PACE program, the Property Assessed Clean Energy Program. They put it up on their website. They set a limit at how much of the voluntary increases in homeowner property taxes, and they had to close the website by the end of that week. I mean, there was tremendous demand. So it looks like we could really go and run with this. And I got to tell you, I mean, PACE, I think, has had a really good PR. But if you look at PACE's performance against that, people are still very reluctant, even after some of the problems with the banks and the real estate industry. They're still very reluctant to implement. So it is hard to get. You really need, in an innovation diffusion process, you need an innovator, and you usually need 2 cycles to diffuse at the rate that you saw for BRT. So you're absolutely right, Debbie. I mean, we had a long gap between, and I think that is part of the process.
The challenge on the PACE program in the residential sector, I think, actually was more severe, not from the banks, but from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
Well, that's true. That's true. Fannie Mae, that's right.
Who felt that having a senior debt obligation before the mortgage would underwrite
You're right about that.
the credit value of their mortgage-backed securities.
I think Fannie Mae, when they said they were going to reject PACE loans into the portfolio. But you know, the question I would have, and I don't know the answer, so I'm just saying, okay, was this Fannie Mae's independent, or did the banks come and talk to Fannie Mae and say, you know, you got to stop this? So I don't know. I don't know.
It's hard to tell. And the thing about the street lighting program, which I think is really elegant and powerful, is that it seems to me that that approach can work in cities where the accounting model keeps separate track of electricity payments for
lighting,
That's right. As opposed to just all electricity in the city, which makes it very hard to demonstrate the verification that you were describing in terms of the actual savings.
Verification is really important, yeah. And again, it's back on the point that Job was just saying about giving the investor
Confidence.
certainty. Yeah, that's right. Now, the other thing I would say on that too, we got something, you know, that's an advantage for us, okay? We are all walking around with, Did I lose my? I'm always losing my, but you know, we have these devices, okay, that once upon a time, they were supposed to be for you to talk to. So now they do a whole lot else besides, you know, in fact, we don't talk to each other anymore, we text, right, and all that, right, okay? But one of the extraordinary things that I think this device represents, okay, is the kind of the access to information that we now have. So this is fundamentally what Irving's raising. If I don't know how much my electricity is for non-street lighting, how do I know, and all the rest? So, and one of the things that's happened out of this particular improvement is that the controls and sensing technology,
Way better.
really cheap now compared to what it used to be. Some of you may know that you can find out at your home what the heck is on and not, and you can even turn it on and off and all of that because of apps that are now in the process of being made. So the reason I'm raising that is that to get that customer, or the investor confidence that Irving is raising, okay? One of the things is if we have sensors at least on the significant energy users in a community, we can now say, this is the evidence, we're now going to automate that sensing, and we're
Yes.
going to then be able to say that the company, you were asking on the ESCO, remember the ESCO, so ESCO is Energy Services Company, in case you're not, but they're big name companies like Siemens and Honeywell and Johnson Controls. They're very big companies for this kind of thing, and they mostly run on controls and sensing technology. They make the guarantee of savings because they know that they're going to be looking at a dashboard of exactly what's going on. And you are paying for that guarantee because they figure they're going to save more than they tell you, okay? But they'll always be careful for that particular purpose. So why is that important? I'm just suggesting to you on this question of sovereign risk, and the question was, can we have the ESCO take over the obligation instead of the city? I think functionally you're not going to need that if we have enough information to separate, since the companies are now guaranteeing the savings, that's tantamount to guaranteeing payment of debt service, because they have the obligation to meet the savings requirement. And in the contracts we wrote, for all the things that we talked about, there is an obligation for the company to make the entity, whatever it is, whole, if for some reason the savings don't appear. They
Right.
have to write the check, pay.
And the risk that remains is that the savings will be achieved, and the entity will divert the cash avoided expense to some other function, not
That's right.
paying the debt.
That's right.
And so one of the things that we're struggling with is what kind of an institution or an entity or a program can bear that risk.
So, and I think you know so you have two things that are going to go on here. One is, if you fail to pay, what this will back up to is that you will not have electricity service. I mean, at some point, you're going to have your service cut because you're not making payment. So that's a risk that many are not willing to take in our world. Not having access to energy is, right? But, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, that's true at the residential level. If it's the city that's not paying the bondholder, their utility may still be getting paid, but the savings that they would have allocated to purchasing electricity but are now saving because of the energy efficiency measure, if they divert that to fixing
Something else.
potholes.
So then what do they have to do? I mean, I'm just playing out your scenario.
Then there has to be somebody who's providing risk cover for that political risk at the city level. It's not a sovereign risk, but the political risk at the city level. And can we find a way to build that into the economics of the project? Or is there some entity who has an overriding interest in the security or other implications of the savings that they will bear that cost?
Well, let me just, and I wanted to get to the other answer because you're raising the larger point, and it was actually in the Miami scenario. The answer to this at the end of the day is that an insurance product is going to come up that is going to price this risk.
Yeah.
And then you're going to pay that if you want that level
Of certainty.
Yeah, okay. But I just want to say in the interim, the other part of this is that if the city diverts the funds and doesn't use it to actually cover and goes off and buys things that are going to increase energy using equipment and all the rest, the bill is still going to come due to them, and they are still going to have to go to their citizens and say, you're not paying enough taxes.
Right.
We need you to belly up in order to. So I'm just saying, I think there is an element of that, and that's why sovereign
Guarantee.
why sovereign guarantee is important.
Attractive.
But I'm not saying that it's perfect. It's not like you're saying. I think you've raised a valid point. Okay? But I do think insurance,
There's
I
a way to
think Swiss
manage
Re
that
has a
risk.
very keen interest in you.
Yes, managing that risk.
Please.
You've stressed the role of potential city-level actions. Is it also important to think of what the states could be doing more?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The states invented the renewable portfolio standard in the US, and they invented the energy efficiency resource standard. Okay, so I think applying that, we still have a little more build out on the energy efficiency resource standard. I think that would be a really important step for them to do. But on your question, I think, and it kind of ties with what Irving is saying, okay, the states also have the ability to start looking at funds that could be created, asking for a match from the private sector. They do this already in, for example, when you want to build bridges and highways, states, not cities, do that, right? And states build funds, separated funds, just for that purpose.
Yeah.
If our states started setting up, they don't have to pay all of it. If our states were to set up sustainable energy funds, this would be the kind of action that could create a whole lot of confidence in others coming in and participating in that. I don't think cities can do that as well. Maybe the really big cities can, but I think this is really the states that would have that greater role. Okay. The states could also, there's a very straightforward thing too that they could, if they said that in these kinds of contracts that you could count what is now externalities, that we could agree to what is, you asked on a carbon tax, there is another way to get the result of a carbon tax, and that is to count the benefit of the avoided carbon. And if the states were to include that, say that that is part of, for example, in their own projects, if I'm financing school districts and I say as part of the school districts, I want to make sure that the environmental benefits of that are included. If states were to do that, that's a statute they can write, and if they were to say that projects will be rated on that basis, that would have a huge impact also. And if the states do that, you're now creating, a basis for a whole industry to come up that is better at doing this kind of thing than we have currently, and that would then also play to commercial, residential, and other users. I don't want to solve it all just by, Debbie's known me for a long time. I am not a Wall Street guy. I mean, I never, but I see the strategic point on the question of bending the curve quickly is we've got to get, if we keep putting capital in the wrong energy system, we're never going to be able to solve this problem. So we've got to find a way to divert that. So that's why I think the states can play a role in that.
I wanted to go back to sort of a more macro question, which is this continued argument the U.S. has, other countries have, that doing all this stuff may in some way come at the expense of economic growth. And we seem to have ample evidence to show that this is not the case.
That's right.
But we can't really seem to get anyone to believe that, or at least we can't seem to get the folks that are really convinced that bending the carbon curve will harm economic growth.
Right.
What's the state of that argument? I mean, do you think we've made a lot of progress in that? Why can't we sort of settle that argument, given the evidence we have?
I think that's the big political question, but I'm just trying to suggest to you that politics question has two scales. And if you ask it at the local level, they believe that energy efficiency creates jobs. And that's why these initiatives are all being voted into place. I don't think that the local levels of representation are somehow, persuaded only by environmental benefits. I think it's also an economic proposition, okay? the local level, the politics works because there's tangible economic benefits that flow into the economy through jobs, through the creation of new industry, things like that. But at the federal level, the societal level, we've had difficulty making that case. And I wish I knew the answer. And if you find out, would you send me an email? And I mean, it's a really good question. But so far, the politics of energy at the societal level tend to be very slow in recognizing this problem and addressing it. Mike?
I think it's fair.
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think that, I'm still, when I look at the argument, again, at the very sort of macro level, it seems that there's two arguments you make about doing something about climate change. You either say, doing nothing is so risky, we can't afford it, so
Right.
do something,
Right.
That's one argument.
Yes.
And the other argument says, yeah, it's going to cost money, but you're going to create all these new jobs, right? And maybe in a narrow cost-benefit way, it might work. But again, the reason it works for cities is because cities don't produce energy, right? So yeah, you're screwing a coal miner who's like 100 miles away,
Yeah.
and you're shifting that job to your city. So it works for the city, but it may not work. But I still think there's a bigger picture argument that says, you can do all these things. You can have more expensive energy. You can do energy efficiency. You can do all these things without any real macroeconomic impact. And I think we have a lot of evidence to show that.
Yes.
But we just can't quite communicate that evidence because we seem to still think that energy is such an important input, which it generally isn't, to an economy's health, that if you tinker with it, you're going to screw up the economy. And I think that's the argument that especially when you think about this country, that's the argument that if you win, kind of like everything else trickles down so quickly.
I think it's an excellent question. I think there are two scales here, and I don't think that what you're calling the macro scale is the only scale. Eventually, you already have with the Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard, you already have a level of activity at the state that is the majority of the U.S. economy is subject to renewable portfolio standards. So, and the reason I'm pointing that out is that the federal government, for whatever else it's been doing or not doing, okay, it has not tread on that particular matter, and in that sense, the politics of the matter is kind of hands-off. So it doesn't give you the positive action that you're asking, but it keeps in the U.S. case, the federal action out. Now, the same point you made, though, if you look at the consequences of that sort of bottom-up strategy until eventually the center learns something, if you look at this in other parts of the world, like Europe, it seems to be that the learning curve is faster in other parts of the world than it is the U.S. So I think the macro scale argument you're making is right. It is a problem. It is the old-fashioned, Kuznets curve argument that somehow you've got to endure the pollution and then make wealth and then clean it up. As you indicated, there's so much evidence that that's not true, but it's been difficult to convince national level coalitions to agree to that. However, Europe is going faster than the U.S. in this, so there's a learning curve there that has taken root. And whether it's the sort of thing that Debbie was pointing out with BRT, that you have to go through kind of like 2 cycles of leadership at the bottom-up level, I don't know. I mean, it's a great research question. I don't know, but I think there is evidence that we're learning how to do this, and I'm still not satisfying you, but I understand the question, and I'm just not sure how to turn it in the U.S. case, but I think there's evidence elsewhere that question is being turned around. Europe would be an example of that, and I do think, for example, in parts of Asia also, there's significant national support now for these sorts of things. So the case of South Korea's the candidates that are running, they have a bit of a problem with their president, and out with one president, and now they're coming in with, every presidential candidate has made a commitment to retire the nuclear power planning system, stop building new plants, and to shift to, and I think a significant part of that is this sort of ground, this bottom-up effort that will make you pay at the polls if you don't. We haven't found that to do that in the U.S. yet. They have found it in Europe. I think it's being found in Asia. It's the best I got, I'm sorry.
Okay. We do have a glass of wine for those of you who can stay on for a little bit. John, thank you very much for coming.
Oh, thank you.
And, giving us reason for coffee.
We're also in envy of your slides.
That's a team effort. Really good graduate students.
With a tremendous amount of data behind it too,
Yeah.
which I think is really fantastic.